Hey everybody, welcome back. Got an interesting one for you today. Another vintage speaker was sent in. This time a Cerwin Vega. An interesting little model there. I thought, oh boy, Cerwin Vega, man, I wonder what this thing's going to measure like. These things were known for being screamers. They play really loud. Woofers, not as high sensitivity woofer as you'd think, but a paper cone woofer has some good qualities about it. A little paper cone mid and a what they call the bullet tweeter, which is a screamer. It plays really loud, doesn't play down really low, but is 100 and something plus dB sensitivity. So let's look at what this thing measured like. Let's just start right off. Let's just get right to it. Everybody wants to know, how did this thing measure? Let's look at the frequency response. As you can see, it's got a real rising response. I mean, the higher you go in frequency, the louder this thing gets. It'll probably take your head off and give you some fatigue, and you'll be sick of listening to these things before you know it. The woofer's level, if you balance it out, it's down around 94 dB, and everything above that is just climbing. So, rough. Horizontal off-axis wasn't as bad as you'd think. At least they did do something right. They did run the drivers up one side of the box, so it's asymmetrical. That definitely helps in the surface reflections a little bit. Vertical off-axis, you can see a pretty big dip there in the vertical off-axis, just due to the high crossover point and the spacing of the acoustic centers. Impedances are pretty smooth. Impedance curve, it does drop down to about 6.5 ohms or so. Not a hard load to drive, and the reason this thing is so smooth all the way across is because they didn't do anything with the crossover to create any change in the response. They just put enough stuff on there to keep it playing within a range so that the drivers wouldn't destruct. Spectral decay, I forgot to do something on the spectral decay. I forgot to take it off of smoothing and reset the time window a little bit. This was actually a lot worse than it shows in this actual measurement. With the smoothing off, you can actually see that peak up there in the woofer's curve, and a lot of ringing. Where you see this trace coming away out there, that's a lot of ringing. So definitely had my work cut out for me. Taking the box apart a little bit here, looking on the inside. The worst thing you could put basically inside of this thing. These are the old spring-loaded push-in connectors that you just had to push raw wire into. It had a circuit breaker on the back for the high frequency, something that's not going to give you the cleanest of signal transfer going through a circuit breaker. And then there's a variable attenuator that you can turn up and down as if that's going to tame it. I actually played with that attenuator quite a bit, up and down, to see where did it make the most balanced response, and the way you saw it was the most balanced response I could get out of it. The woofer had no network on it. That's typical of that old Cerwin Vega stuff. The woofer just plays full range just till it rolls off, and at the top of the woofer's range is where you see that huge resonant peak that is going to be a very strong source of irritation and fatigue as that thing continues to ring. And then they put one little cap and a coil on this, a little first order high pass and a low pass, and then one cap on the tweeter to protect it. And that's it. And the coil is definitely dental floss gauge. This may be thinner than dental floss. It is some of the thinnest gauge coil I have ever seen. All of the wiring on here, even, it's as cheap as I've ever seen anything ever that's come through here almost. Little polyester caps, real small values. There is nothing to this. They made these for nothing back in the day. The box, though, is 3/4 inch material. It definitely could use some bracing. It definitely has some resonance issues. It is what it is, but the biggest factor is the frequency response. As it goes higher in frequency, is just screaming. It's 6 dB or more above the lower woofer level. So I thought, man, I don't know if I'll be able to straighten this out or not. It just depends on what the drivers do when I start putting filters on it and trying to control it. And believe it or not, this was not that bad. It really didn't take that many crossover parts. Let's throw up the let's throw up first of all just the new measurement on this thing. In fact, let's look at what I was able to do with it compared to the original measurement. And you can see I balanced this thing out really well. I mean, it's smooth. It's a flat response across there. And let's look at the crossover response. That looks good also. You can see that the top end is still rolled way off on the tweeter. Everything above about 15 kHz, it starts to take a pretty big dive. There's no fixing that. But I was able to bring the tweeter down and leave it within a comfortable range. I was able to let the mid play as a mid and let it play down low and let the woofer just be a woofer. So it's crossing down a lot lower than it was. We're taking a little bit of those high frequencies out of this thing. We're not letting it play up there where it's ringing, and we're keeping the drivers in a range that they're more comfortable in. So, and it didn't take that many parts, so that was huge. I couldn't believe this thing worked out as well as it did. Now, granted, some of the parts are big. When you go to low crossover points, we're talking big coils, like bigger than this binding post cup, and a large value cap. And so the cost of some of that does go up a little bit because it's three-way design. I factored in some no-res, some tube connectors, all new wiring. It turned out really well. Before I get to that, though, let's look at the rest of the measurements. I did horizontal off-axis in both directions because it's asymmetrical. And here it is in one direction. And below it there, I'll let you look at the off-axis in the other direction. You can tell it's definitely different, and that's because the drivers are up on one side of the baffle. If it were right down the middle, it'd be the same on both sides, but you'd have the same reflection at the same wavelength or same frequency in two places, and then it causes a lot more of a peak and not so much a gradual roll-off like we're getting in some of this off-axis. The vertical off-axis, it's way better than it was, but it's not bad. I mean, it's not great. It's still crossing the tweeter to the mid at a high crossover point. It's up there around 3,200 hertz, and I just really couldn't let the tweeter play down much lower than that. So as you move vertically, it does cause a little bit of a suck out there, but not too bad. The impedance now looks a little more jacked. That's because there's actual filters going in there and creating resistance and keeping drivers within their own range. And the spectral decay is much cleaner. There's still a little bit of ringing now. I'm getting a little ringing there at the bottom of the mid. Not near as much, though, as what the breakup in the ringing was at the top of the woofer's range. All in all, not bad. So we took a speaker that was almost impossible to listen to over a long period, something that was pretty rough, and balanced this thing out to where it's far better than it ever was from the factory. The no-res will take care of some of the cabinet resonances. You're going to get tighter, cleaner bass, deep bass. This thing actually plays down pretty low. We did some sine wave sweeps through it there in the shop, starting at 20 hertz and moving up. And even at 30 hertz, it had quite a bit of output. So a fun speaker, 94 dB sensitivity, so it's still got really good sensitivity. It's an easy load to drive. You could play this thing with a small tube amp. And for an old vintage speaker, it turned out really well. Now, granted, that little bullet tweeter may not have the detail and resolution of a modern dome tweeter, but as far as taking a speaker that the drivers are still in a good shape and restoring it and bringing it up to a modern level, we did that. And it'll definitely be a fun project, an easy project. There's plenty of room in this cabinet to mount the crossover, and there's plenty big enough hole to slide the thing in there in. Easy to work on. Fun project. Total on everything with all new everything. That's all new crossover parts. It's tube connectors. It is using the all JB poly caps with a JB bypass cap on the tweeter cap. So we're trying to keep it in the budget range as much as possible. No Sonic caps or anything exotic in this one. All new wiring and 2 sheets of no-res came to $461 plus shipping. That's the current cost of all the parts. If you guys own one of these old vintage Cerwin Vega speakers and you want to upgrade this thing and have some fun with it, we've got you covered. This model was the D3, by the way, the D3 model. And this network that I designed for this thing is only specific to this model. If you've got another Cerwin Vega model, maybe one of the bigger models, you're going to have to send that in to me. I'll see what I can do with it. Again, I just charge for the parts and only what the parts cost. I do all this design work for free, and I do it because I enjoy it, and it creates a fun project for our customers, and it gets people involved in DIY that have never been involved in DIY. It's a good intro to doing something yourself, and then you can come to us later for other kits and other models and enjoy the hobby just as everybody else does. It's a great starter model. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Hit the like button if you appreciated it. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't. And we'll see you guys in the next video.